my name is Beck and welcome to a video where I'm going to discuss 5 books that probably shouldn't have become series. I'm going to kick it off with Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. I read this book and it might surprise people to say that I gave it a 5 stars when I read it because I just finished writing a massive paper for school and it was just so draining that I didn't have any brain capacity left for anything. So when I picked up Red Queen and I just got sucked into it, I loved the X-Men kind of vibe. I loved that it was fantasy with supernatural powers and rebellion, and this main character who was kind of like the subversion of the chosen one. I think there were tropes in that book that we are told are done a lot, but the way that Red Queen actually handled the tropes in that first book, obviously it made me give it a 5 stars. However, when it continued into the quartet, the main character reiterated her perspective quite a lot. She had this mantra that she would say to herself constantly, even out loud to others. It got very frustrating very quickly. A lot of the characters around her didn't seem very deeply developed. It seemed like a very surface series, and so when big things happened and when plot twists occurred and they were political in nature as well as just interpersonal with characters, it didn't really hook me and I just saw things coming really easily. I predicted a major twist in the second book. I didn't care about books 3 and 4, so I wish it just stayed with the first book and then it didn't become a series, because holy crap, I really enjoyed that first book and I'm just going to keep that in my memory and try not to think about the others. Next up is a Brandon Sanderson book, and if you know me, you know that he's my favorite author, so the fact that he's on this list is probably a surprise to you. The reason he's on this list is because he wrote a graphic novel called White Sand, but initially that was in the Arcanum Unbounded collection and it was a written short story. So I read the Arcanum Unbounded collection, I loved White Sand as a written form, but then I looked at it as the graphic novel and the art and the writing, there wasn't really a balance there, and I didn't like the style of it either, and the way it was told, it didn't seem very interesting. It didn't really grab me. So when I responded to the written format, I was obsessed. But when I read the comic, I just gave it a 3 stars and I didn't love it that much. And the only reason I've kept it is because I took a ton of books with me when Brandon Sanderson came to Australia a few years ago, and it is signed to me. So I'm never going to get rid of it. I'm never going to part with it. But in terms of the graphic novel series, I think it's 2 or 3 volumes long, and I have not bought the others because they're like 30 Australian dollars a pop, and that is very expensive. So I doubt that I'm going to continue this series. I wish it didn't even occur in the first instance. I wish it stayed as a written format because that is where Brandon Sanderson excels, at least in my opinion at the point of filming this. Maybe in the future things will change because I know he's written a graphic novel called Dark One and I haven't read that, so I can't comment on his more recent work. But as far as White Sand is concerned, it just didn't marry up with different formats. Like, it didn't translate very well from written into graphic novel. I feel like there was a learning curve there that wasn't ironed out enough, unfortunately. So that is why White Sand is on this list. After that, I feel is like a classic form of YA, and it is The Hunger Games. This is a book that I read when I was 15 and I was obsessed with it. It really informed a generation's worth of reading. It kickstarted the genre of dystopian in young adult, and that was a massive curve. And I just love this story, but the way that it ended in the trilogy and even parts of the second book, it's like they didn't need to be there. It's like the writing, at least to me, I don't know if other people will share my opinion or not, but it got more loose and it got weaker as the series went on, and I feel like this was just a tighter book in terms of the politics, the characterization and the plot and the pace. I think this was the standard, and then after that it went down. So I wish this just stayed as like one form of something that we could love rather than it becoming a trilogy and then a massive franchise. Not that I didn't love the movies, I adored the movies, but I just wanted it to be like a standalone contained work, and it is a trilogy. I didn't love the other books. I do like Finnick, only good thing about Catching Fire. So I don't know, this one's a bit hit or miss for me. I do like the trilogy, but I loved the first book and that just doesn't match up with how I felt about the rest of the books in the series. So that is why this is on here as well. I don't hate it. I just wish it didn't get continued to the extent that it did. And now there are only 2 left. The next one is Aurora Rising by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. I don't have the first book on me, so this is the second book, Aurora Burning. If you've seen my spoiler talk, you know that I have a bunch of issues with this. I'm considering lowering that to a 2, but the jury is still out on that choice, so let's continue on with the video. This is about a girl named Ori, and she is in space. She's found by this guy named Ty, and Tyler is taking his pilot exam, or he's supposed to be, but he ends up saving Ori instead. instead. And he discovers that Ori is actually belonging to this civilization that has been wiped out, and she has been in a cryosleep for like 100 years. And so everything that Ori thinks she knows is not the case. And so she ends up kind of forming part of this ragtag crew because Tyler forfeited his pilot's exam. He was instead saving Ori, and instead of getting the highest marks of the class, which is what he usually gets, and therefore he'd get top pick of anybody, he just got the ragtag group that was left behind. And so that is what forms the basis of what Aurora Rising is. And I love the dynamics and what was growing in the first book, but when it came to here, I found that characters didn't do what they were characterized to do and instead did what the plot pushed them to do, and it felt out of sync, it felt out of character, and it just felt a bit too dramatized when it could have been avoided, and a more tense and interesting approach could have been taken instead. So it felt surface when it could have gone deeper, because the first book promised depth and the second book didn't. So hopefully the third book changes my mind, but I don't have a big hope about that. So I really hoped that this would just stay as a first book, but it seems to be the way these series go. They become trilogies, so unfortunately it's not a standalone, and I really wish it was, because I loved so much of the characterization in book one, and I just couldn't get behind this for the characterization. So unfortunately, the Aurora cycle is on this list. And then lastly, we have Red Rising, and this is a series that I love. So don't click away from the video in outrage. I read this trilogy, I adored it. The audiobooks are fantastic. The narrator of them does an awesome internal voice, and he differentiates it from Darrow's external voice because the accent varies. So Darrow is this red, and he lives in a society where reds are on the lowest rung of the ladder ever. Golds are at the top. And so what happens here is he's part of the red colonies, and they tend to mine for ore and valuable materials. So Darrow was brought up in poverty, essentially with large families that often experience trauma and death. And so he one day sees and experiences this trauma, and then from that he decides to rebel against all of the colors. And so that is what Red Rising follows. At least in the first book, it's got this kind of Hunger Games vibe with a rebellion and a contest. And then after this book, I read Golden Sun and Morning Star, and I gave them 5 stars. This was a 4.5. So I love this trilogy, and you're probably wondering, Beck, why is this on this list? But I Raise You Iron Gold and Dark Age. Those are 2 books that seem very far removed from this trilogy. They follow a different group of characters. It's a different stream of a story. It's very politically driven rather than just focusing on one character. And I like that these are just focused on Darrow, because if they weren't just isolated to his perspective, I think I would struggle. And I think that is the reason why I didn't love Iron Gold and Dark Age. And there's another one to come after that. So hopefully after rereading the series, which I intend to do at some point soon, I don't really have a time limit on myself. When I reread these, I'm hoping that rereading these will inform me, and then I will go back into rereading Iron Gold and Dark Age and seeing how I feel on the back of doing that, because I read them all far apart. So I smashed out the trilogy, and then after that I waited like a year or 2 for Iron Gold. And so that is a distinct gap between knowing all of the things that happened in this world. So yes, this is on the list, but it's a tentative edition, because like I said, I love the trilogy and I really wanted to love the other installments, but they just did not get me. But there you go. Those are my list of 5 books that should not have become series, at least in my opinion. I'm sure there are others that aren't on this list. I'm sure there are ones that you want to add to this list. So let me know what series you were disappointed in down below. I would love to chat, because I like to have my expectations lowered before going into books, because in some cases I probably enjoy them more, or in others I probably feel the same as you guys. So let me know down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll talk to you in the comments, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.